Hey there, this is Miss Gourley. Reading today's reading for lesson 7 of our Frankenstein unit. I'll be reading chapters 15 and 16. So, today's focus in our master packet gives you the little snippet of today's lesson that we are reviewing the key concept of theme again. So far, we've explored, excuse me, two themes: the dangers of the pursuit of knowledge, the nature of humans, and then today the theme of revenge, which is probably the easiest theme and one of the ones we're most familiar with. So hopefully you've already watched the Edpuzzle video. Now you're going to read along for two chapters with me and do chapter 17 on your own, answer the questions. Then the focus skill is the same one as we've done for the other theme lessons, where as you read, you will highlight 3 quotes or phrases in your text, and then you will pick one of those to analyze in your double entry journal at the bottom. Note that we also have a narrator switch here. So far, we've switched from Walton to Victor, from Victor to the creature. So now we're going to find out who else switches in the narrator position. Before we read for today, just to catch up from last time, chapters 11 and 12, the creature is now telling his story to Victor. We learn about his first days, how he was learning to survive and take care of himself. He finds a cottage where there's a little shed next to it that he can stay in and be safe and kind of observe the humans of the cottage. The summary for chapter 12, he learned their names, he learned that they were poor, he started to help take care of them kind of without them knowing. And then when you read chapter 13 for last lesson, we learned that there's a girl named Safi, an Arabian girl, so that means somewhere from the Middle East, has come. Presumably, she is in love with Felix the son, who is now extremely happy. They are teaching Safi their language, and as they're teaching her, the creature is kind of watching and basically getting free lessons as well. He never goes in daylight because he's scared of how the villagers or the cottagers will react. And then now we pick up. I give you a summary of chapter 14, which starts right here. The creature learns the history of the cottagers. So by listening to them, he learned that they were a wealthy family from Paris, and that Felix the son visited a Turkish man in prison and fell in love with his daughter Safi. Felix tried to help Safi's father escape prison, but when the plot was realized, de Lacy, that's the father, Agatha the daughter, and Felix the son, they were all exiled from France and found refuge in a small cottage in Germany. Eventually, Safi saved enough money and fled France to be with Felix. So here's the background of the family. Now, at the very beginning of chapter 15, I also give you a little summary because there's a few pages that passed on that I didn't feel like you needed to read, that talked about that during one of his nightly excursions, because the creature only goes out at night, he found an old suitcase filled with books in the woods. Since he had recently learned to read from observing the cottagers, they were teaching Safi to read, so he picked up on how to read. He began reading advanced books and increased his knowledge on human history, geography, and science. Oh, excuse me, keep yawning. He also discovered, so he's beginning to basically give himself a free education. He also discovered that he could now read papers that he had found in his clothes. If you remember, he said in chapter 11 that when he first left Victor Frankenstein's apartment, he had grabbed some clothes because he was cold. And now there was a piece of paper in there that he can read, and he reads the name Victor Frankenstein. So he knows the name of his creator now. Um, and he's becoming increasingly educated. So now we're going to pick up chapter 15 with right here, the winter. The winter advanced, and an entire revolution of the seasons had taken place since I woke into life. So a year has passed. He's been alive for a whole year now. My attention at this time was solely directed towards my plan of introducing myself into the cottage of my protectors. I considered many ideas, but that on which I finally fixed was to enter the dwelling when the blind old man would be alone. I had the sagacity or wisdom enough to discover that the unnatural hideousness of my person was the chief object of horror with those who had formerly beheld me. My voice, although harsh, had nothing terrible in it. I thought, therefore, that if, in the absence of his children, I could gain the goodwill and mediation of the old de Lacy, I might by his means be tolerated by his younger protectors. So since the old man is blind, if he can get him alone and introduce himself, the old man won't be terrified because he can't see him, and then the old man can vouch for him to his kids. This is his plan. One day, when the sun shone on the red leaves that stewed the ground with diffused cheerfulness, although it denied warmth, Safi, Agatha, and Felix departed on a long country walk, and the old man, at his own desire, was left alone in the cottage. So here's his chance. When his children had departed, he took up his guitar and played several mournful but sweet airs, more sweet and mournful than I had ever heard him play before. At first his countenance or expression was illuminated with pleasure, but as he continued, thoughtfulness and sadness succeeded. At length, laying aside the instrument, he sat absorbed in reflection. My heart beat quick. This was the hour and moment of trial, which would decide my hopes or realize my fears. The servants were gone to a neighboring fair. All was silent in and around the cottage. It was an excellent opportunity. Yet when I proceeded to execute my plan, my limbs failed me and I sank to the ground. Again I rose, exerting all the firmness of which was master, removed the planks which I had placed before my hovel to conceal my retreat. The fresh air revived me, and with renewed determination I approached the door of their cottage. Let's find out what's going to happen when he reveals himself to the family. I knocked. "Who is there?" said the old man. "Come in." I entered. "Pardon this intrusion," said I. "I am a traveler in want of little rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." "Enter," said De Lacy, "and I will try in what manner I can to relieve your wants. But unfortunately my children are far from home, and as I am blind, I am afraid I shall find it difficult to procure food for you. First of all, if I'm this old man, and a stranger comes into my house, I would not announce to them that my children are far away and that I'm blind, because this person could rob or murder you. But that's a separate discussion. Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. It is warmth and rest only that I need." I sat down, and a silence ensued, or silence began. I knew that every minute was precious to me, yet I remained irresolute or firm, unchanging in what manner to commence the interview. When the old man addressed me, "By your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countrymen. Are you French?" Remember that he's learning the language from the cottagers. So since they're speaking French, he's learned French. "No, but I was educated by a French family, and understand that language only. I am now going to claim the protection of some friends, whom I sincerely love, and of whose favor I have some hopes. Are they Germans? No, they are French, but let us change the subject. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around, and I have no relation or friend upon the earth. These amiable or kind people to whom I go have never seen me and know little of me. I am full of fears, for if I fail there, I am an outcast in the world forever. Do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by an obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. So, according to De Lacy, he thinks that humans are essentially good, that they are full of love and goodwill. Rely, therefore, on your hopes, and if these friends are good and amiable, do not despair. They are kind, they are the most excellent creatures in the world. And remember, he's talking about this family. He's talking about De Lacy to De Lacy, but he doesn't know it. But unfortunately, they are prejudiced against me. I have good dispositions, I have good kind of character. My life has been here so far harmless and in some degree beneficial, but a fatal prejudice clouds their eyes. When they ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold a detestable monster. That is indeed unfortunate, but if you are really blameless, cannot you undeceive them? I am about to undertake that task, and it is on that account that I feel so many overwhelming terrors. I tenderly love these friends. I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habit of daily kindness towards them, and they believe that I wish to injure them, and in that prejudice which I wish to overcome. Where do these friends reside? Near this spot. He's trying to be like subtle but not subtle to tell him, you are the family I've been observing. You're the people who I hope will take me in, who I've learned to love, who I've taken care of. Um, the old man paused and then continued. If you will unreservedly confide in me the particulars of your tale, I perhaps may be of use in undeceiving them. I am blind and cannot judge of your appearance, but there is something in your words which persuades me that you are sincere. I am poor and in exile, but it will afford me true pleasure to be in any way serviceable to a human creature. So he says, listen, if you tell me your whole story, I will do my best to, speak up for you, to defend you, because you seem very sincere. Excellent man, I thank you and accept your generous offer. You raise me from the dust by this kindness, and I trust that by your aid I shall not be driven from the society and sympathy of your fellow creatures. Heaven forbid, if you were really criminal, for that would only drive you to desperation, and not instigate you to virtue. I also am unfortunate. I and my family have been condemned, although innocent, Judge therefore if I do not feel for your misfortunes. How can I thank you, my best and only benefactor? From your lips first have I heard the voice of kindness directed towards me, so you're the first person ever to be kind to me. I shall be forever grateful, and your present humanity assures me of success with those friends whom I am on the point of meeting. May I know the names and residence of those friends? I paused. This, I thought, was the moment of decision, which was to rob me of or bestow happiness on me forever. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, so he's trying to muster his courage to tell him the truth. But the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sank into the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment I heard the steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seizing the hand of the old man, I cried, "Now is the time. Save and protect me. You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Do not desert me in this hour of trial." "Great God!" exclaimed the old man. "Who are you?" So he starts sobbing. He hears the kids coming. He grabs the old man and tells him, basically, "I've been stalking your family. Please protect me. Please stand up for me." And the man is just astounded. At that instant, the cottage door was opened, and Felix, Safie, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Safie, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sank within me as with bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blow, when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted or left the cottage, and in general tumult escaped unperceived in my hovel. So poor creature finally mustered the courage to reveal himself to the cottagers, hoping they would love and accept him, and unfortunately his greatest fear happened. Agatha fainted, Safie fled, Felix attacked him, and just with great sadness, he didn't fight back, he just escaped back to his little hovel. I'm going to cut some time out of the passage where it talks about him after being treated so harshly by the cottagers, he ran off into the woods and grew in his anger towards mankind. So he just starts stewing in his anger. After much consideration, he decides to travel back to the cottage, only to find it deserted. So he comes back to try to maybe talk to them again or get his things. He doesn't see the family, but he sees two men approach the cottage. So that's going to be the beginning of chapter 16 now. So make sure you've answered. There was just 2 questions for 15. What does he hope will happen when he talks to Lacey and why? And what happens when they return home? So you can kind of sum up those in a sentence based on what we just read. Presently 2 countrymen passed by, but pausing near the cottage, they entered into conversation using violent gesticulations or violent gestures. So they were talking loudly with their hands. But I did not understand what they said, as they spoke the language of the country, which differed from that of my protectors. So they're speaking German, not French. He can't understand them. Soon after, however, Felix approached with another man. I was surprised, as I knew that he had not quitted the cottage that morning, and waited anxiously to discover from his discourse the meaning of those unusual appearances. So now Felix's son has come back. "Do you consider," said his companion to him, "that you will be obliged to pay 3 months' rent, and to lose the produce of your garden? I do not wish to take any unfair advantage, and I beg therefore that you will take some days to consider your determination." So his landlord is basically like, "You're going to still have to pay me 3 months' rent. You're going to lose all the stuff from your garden. Are you sure you want to do this?" And he said, "It is utterly useless," replied Felix. "We can never again inhabit your cottage. The life of my father is in the greatest danger, owing to the dreadful circumstance that I have related. My wife and my sister will never recover from their horror. I entreat you, I beg you, not to reason with me any more. Take possession of your tenement, your house, and let me fly from this place." Felix trembled violently as he said this. He and his companion entered the cottage, in which they remained for a few minutes, and then departed. I never saw any of the family of De Lacy more. I continued for the remainder of the day in my hovel, in a state of utter and stupid despair. My protectors had departed, and had broken the only link that held me to the world. For the first time, the feelings of revenge and hatred filled my bosom, and I did not strive to control them, but allowing myself to be borne away by the stream, I bent my mind towards injury and death. Here would be a really good line to highlight for the theme of revenge, right? He's letting it fill his bosom, his heart, Um, he's letting it control him, and now he's bending his mind. He's focusing his thoughts towards injury and death. When I thought of my friends, of the mild voice of DeLacy, the gentle eyes of Agatha, and the exquisite beauty of the Arabian, these thoughts vanished with a gush of tears somewhat soothed me, and a gush of tears somewhat soothed me. But again, when I reflected that they had spurned and deserted me, like anger returned, a rage of anger, and unable to injure anything human, I turned my fury towards inanimate objects. As night advanced, I placed a variety of combustibles around the cottage, and after having destroyed every vestige of cultivation, or if you look down here, any trace of plants, so he destroys their garden, I waited with forced impatience until the moon had sunk to commence my operations. As the night advanced, a fierce wind arose from the winds and quickly dispersed the clouds that had loitered or kind of lingered in the heavens. The blast tore along a mighty avalanche and produced a kind of insanity in my spirits that burst all bounds of reason and reflection. So he's now just, he has no reason, he has no thinking, he is just an avalanche of insanity. He's not thinking, he's just feeling anger. I lighted the dry branch of a tree and danced with fury around the devoted cottage, my eyes still fixed on the western horizon, the edge of which the moon nearly touched. A part of its orb was at length hid, and I waved my brand. It sank, and with a loud scream I fired the straw, the heath, the bushes which I had collected. The wind fanned the fire, and the cottage was quickly enveloped or surrounded by the flames, which clung to it and licked it with their forked and destroying tongues. As soon as I was convinced that no assistance could save any part of the habitation, I quitted the scene and sought refuge in the woods. So, in his anger, excuse me, he actually set fire to the cottage. So he used to be kind and caring towards them, and now he's bent on revenge. So, what does a creature do after the family flees the college? We really just answered. And now we are here. And now, with the world before me, whither should I bend my steps? So where should I go? I resolved to fly far from the scene of my misfortunes, but to me, hated and despised, every country would be equally horrible. At length the thought of you crossed my mind. Remember, he's telling this story to Victor, so now he's talking to Victor, his creator. I learned from your papers that you were my father, my creator, and to whom could I apply with more fitness than to him who had given me life? Among the lessons that Felix had bestowed upon Safie, geography had not been omitted or left out. I had learned from these the relative situations of different countries of the earth. You had mentioned Geneva as the name of your native town, and towards that place I resolved to proceed. So the papers he had of Frankenstein mentioned that his hometown was Geneva. He learned geography from Felix when he was teaching Safie, and so now he's going to go towards Geneva. He's going to try to find Victor. I continued to wind among the paths of the wood until I came to its boundary, which was skirted by a deep and rapid river, into which many of the trees bent their branches. Now budding with the fresh spring, here I paused, not exactly knowing what path to pursue, when I heard the sound of voices that induced me to conceal myself under the shade of a cypress tree. I was scarcely hid when a young girl came running towards the spot where I was concealed, laughing, as if she ran from someone in sport. She's playing, basically, this little girl. She continued her course along the precipitous sides of the river. If I want to go down to 139, I see that means the dangerous or steep edges of the river, where suddenly her foot slipped, and she fell into the rapid stream. I rushed from my hiding place, and with extreme labor, from the force of the current, saved her and dragged her to shore. She was senseless, and I endeavored, or like she wasn't showing any sign of life, and I endeavored by every means in my power to restore animation, when I was suddenly interrupted by the approach of a rustic, or a countryman, who was probably the person from whom she had playfully fled, so the girl's father. On seeing me, he darted towards me, and tearing the girl from my arms, hastened towards the deeper part of the wood. I followed speedily, I hardly knew why, but when the man saw me draw near, he aimed a gun, which he carried, at my body and fired. I sank to the ground, and my injurer, with increased swiftness, escaped to the wood. This was the reward for my benevolence, for my kindness. I had saved a human being from destruction, and as a payment, I now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feelings of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. But the agony of my wound overcame me, my pulses paused, and I fainted. So he tried for another moment to be kind. He tried to save this little girl who was drowning, and as a payment for saving her life, the father shoots him with a gun and flees. So now he's just kind of like, that's the last straw. I am no way ever going to be kind to humans because they will always just be evil towards me. So he vows eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind. For some weeks I led a miserable life in the woods, endeavoring to cure the wound which I had received. The ball had entered my shoulder, the bullet, and I knew not whether it had remained there or passed through. At any rate, I had no means of extracting it. My sufferings were augmented or increased also by the oppressive sense of the injustice and ingratitude of their infliction. My daily vows rose for revenge, a deep and deadly revenge, such as would alone compensate for the outrages and anguish I endured. So there's no way that his wound will ever fully heal. So instead, he's going to seek to find healing through his anger and his revenge. After some weeks, my wound healed, and I continued my journey. The labors I endured were no longer to be alleviated or made better by the bright sun or gentle breezes of spring. All joy was but a mockery, which insulted my desolate or sad state. It made me feel more painfully than I'd ever made for the enjoyment of pleasure. So he no longer enjoyed the simple things like the gentle breeze. He's just everything makes him mad, makes him angry. But my toils now drew near a close, and in 2 months from this I reached the environs of Geneva, or the surrounding vicinity. So after 2 months, he's finally near Geneva. It was evening when I arrived and retired to a hiding place among the fields that surround it to mediate in what manner I should apply to you. So he is in kind of a hiding place and he's trying to think through how should I approach seeing you. I was oppressed by fatigue and hunger, and far too unhappy to enjoy the gentle breezes of evening, or the prospect of the sun setting behind the stupendous mountains of Jura. At this time a slight sleep relieved me from the pain of reflection, which was disturbed by the approach of a beautiful child, who came running into the recess I had chosen. So he was sleeping, and then a beautiful child runs into the area where he was hiding. I had chosen with all the sportiveness of infancy. Um, so he's saying that the boy ran like he was just playing. Suddenly, as I gazed on him, an idea seized me that this little creature was unprejudiced and had little too short a time to be imbibed with horror or deformity. So, because this boy was so young, he might not be scared of my appearance. He's too young to know to be scared. So, if therefore I could seize him and educate him as my companion and friend, I should be able to desolate in this peopled earth. So, I should not be so desolate or alone. If I can get this little boy to like me since he's too young to be scared, then maybe I can find people who can like me. Urged by this impulse, I seized on the boy as he passed and drew him towards me. As soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes and uttered a shrill scream. I drew his hand forcibly from his face and said, "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me." He struggled violently. "Let me go," he cried. "Monster, ugly wretch! You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces. You are an ogre. Let me go, or I will tell papa. Boy, you will never see your father again. You must come with me." "Hideous monster, let me go. My papa is a syndic," which if I go down means a government official. So my daddy's important. "He is M. Frankenstein. He will punish you. You dare not keep me." "Frankenstein? You belong then to my enemy, to him towards whom I have sworn eternal revenge. You shall be my first victim." The child still struggled and loaded with the epithets which carried despair to my heart, which the names are insults. So the boy was still struggling and screaming insults at him. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, "I too can create desolation or loneliness, emptiness. My enemy is not invulnerable. His death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him." So he's basically like, finally, I've wounded my enemy. I've hurt Frankenstein, and I will continue to do so till I destroy him. So we can put together he kills a small boy in the woods by strangling him. So now we know that the monster did indeed kill his younger brother, William. As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. In spite of my malignity or my kind of evilness, it softened and attracted me. For a few moments I gazed with delight in her dark eyes, fringed by deep lashes, and her lovely lips. But presently my rage returned. I remembered that I was forever deprived of the delights that such beautiful creatures could bestow, and that she whose resemblance I contemplated would, in regarding me, have changed that air divine benignity or kindness to one expressive of disgust and affright, or fright, basically. So, first of all, there was a line in there about um, revenge. So we could highlight this one where he first says that he's sworn eternal revenge against Frankenstein. Here, where he learns about his enemy being vulnerable, that he's going to cause him despair. And so he finds the miniature, the small locket picture that William had taken from Elizabeth. And that's why they framed Justine for murder, because somehow Justine ends up with this locket. But he sees the picture of Victor's mother. He thinks she's so beautiful. It softens him, but then he realizes this is just another human who would reject me and scream at me, and that made him angry again. Can you wonder that such thoughts transported me with rage? I only wonder at that moment, instead of venting my sensations in exclamations of agony, I did not rush among mankind and perish and attempt to destroy all. So he said, I was so distraught, I'm surprised I didn't just go and try to destroy everyone. While I was, excuse me again. While I was overcome by these feelings, I left the spot where I had committed the murder, in seeking a more secluded hiding place. I entered a barn which had appeared to me to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was young, not indeed so beautiful as whose portrait I held, but of an agreeable aspect and blooming in the loveliness of youth and health. Here, I thought, is one of those whose joy and parting smiles are bestowed on all but me. And then I bent over her and whispered, Awake, fairest, thy lover is near. He who would give his life but to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes. My beloved, awake. The sleeper stirred, a thrill of terror ran through me. So he was going to almost purposefully wake her up and scare her, because he just got angry when he sees another beautiful creature who would be mad at him. But when she does start to stir, he freaks out. Should she indeed awake and see me and curse me and denounce the murderer? Thus would she assuredly act if her darkened eyes opened and she beheld me. The thought was madness, so this girl would clearly know I was the murderer if she awoke. It stirred the fiend within me, the devil, the demon within me. Not I, but she shall suffer. The murder I have committed because I am forever robbed of all that she could give, she shall atone or pay for. The crime had its source in her, be hers the punishment. Thanks to the lessons of Felix and the sagacious or the wise laws of man, I had learned now to work mischief. I bent over her and placed the portrait securely in one of the folds of her dress. She moved again and I fled. So he's so mad at humans that he wants all of them to suffer. So instead of trying to scare the girl, he decides to frame her. So he leaves the locket in her dress so that she'll be framed for the murder. So he's quite smart. For some days I haunted the spot where these scenes had taken place, sometimes wishing to see you, sometimes resolved to quit the world and its miseries forever. At length I wandered towards these mountains, and have ranged through their immense recesses, consumed by a burning passion which you alone can gratify. We may not part until you have promised to comply with my request. I am alone and miserable. Man will not ever associate with me. But one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being, you must create. So at the very end of his story, the creature tells him, no man will ever accept me, but if there was another creature as horrible and monstrous as myself, she would not deny me. So he says, you must create me a companion. You must create me a woman. You must create me a wife. That's the creature's demand. And now we're going to pick up in chapter 17. You're going to read on your own. And the point of view is going to switch to Victor. So make sure where it says narrator switch, you write, we go from the creature, now back to Victor. Make sure you've answered all the questions and complete your focus skill activity. Reach out if you have any questions.